wouldn't be able to speak to you if you weren't a group. Who here knows my story, or at least vaguely knows it?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't actually need to go into too much detail then, because you guys can all watch that video, right? That video has saved me so much time. So you know the story then, great. But what I want to say is that, you know, a lot of people look at Melbourne and they think, how did that happen? You know, how did the government do that? How did the people like sit back and let that happen? You know, they didn't. We didn't sit back and let it happen. It's just, it was hard for you to see it from here. But because we were pushed against the wall the most probably in the world, well, we were, Melbourne specifically, not Australia-wide, but Melbourne specifically was the worst in the world. It's not a competition we wanted to win, but we did. And because of that, I can say categorically, and I've now been to, you know, many group events all over the world, different cultures, so I can say this with somewhat authority, that Melbourne has the most passionate and biggest freedom movement per capita based on population because of what we went through.
Awesome.
So like, you know, to make, yes, exactly, to make orange juice, you need to squeeze the shit out of lemons, don't you? Right? I mean, not lemons, but the oranges. You get my point.
Unless
you know,
it's genetically modified.
Diamonds get made under pressure, etc. So what I've found with the freedom movement when I've been traveling to different countries, and I've been to Norway and Sweden and Denmark and all these different places, and Ireland and Scotland, and what I noticed is that the stronger the lockdowns were, the more passionate and the bigger the freedom movement is in that country as well. It really is case in point. So the reason I'm telling you that is when you look at humanity and you think that they are just all asleep, it's just because they haven't gone through enough pain, you know? And I know that sounds depressing, but it's not. Think of your own lives and some of the worst things that you've been through. Probably 2 or 3 years later, you realize that that was the best thing that ever happened to you. But it was like really, really painful. So if things get bad again, which they likely will, but we don't know exactly what it's gonna look like, when people are pushed against the wall, more and more people are gonna wake up. And that's why you're keeping the flame alight, because when those people wake up, they're going to go through a very big depression, okay? Because they're gonna realize what happens, they're gonna realize how they treated people like us who were just trying to help them. You know, we helped them try to get them to not take the vaccine, and now we're helping them with the vaccine adverse reaction stories. Like, we've been helping them on both ends of the spectrum. And while doing that, we've been empowering ourselves. We've become stronger people. We've probably become people that we didn't even know we had inside of us. So we're stronger than we used to be. So we are going to need to be there for those people when they wake up and they realize that they've been taken for a ride their whole lives. And that's why, if it's possible to forgive people for what they did to us or what they did to you at work or discriminate, if I can forgive the police for asking me to spread my bits, then you got, that was the worst thing. Then you guys can forgive your co-worker for being brainwashed, right? So anyway, I'm kind of going down a tangent, but I do think that things are going to ramp up to some extent. I don't know when, but it's going to be a fantastic opportunity for you to wake up people and for you to triple, quadruple this group, because every time in Melbourne when there was another lockdown or the lockdown was extended, our groups grew, our groups grew, our groups grew. Every time they pushed us harder, we grew. And also, if you think about after, for example, the vaccine, there's a lot of data coming out now about adverse reactions and things like that, and a lot of people unfortunately got coerced and took the jabs and they got sick or whatever. These people are waking up, and we don't know who they are because they weren't there during the height of like the protests and stuff like that. There are all these awake people that we haven't met yet. So when things go down again, all those new awake people are going to be a part of it. And let me tell you another thing. And again, I know this on authority because people have told me personally. That's why I'm doing this tour, to learn this sort of stuff about the freedom movement and to be able to make these comments. People that, for example, were exactly like us, but wore a mask because they didn't want to deal with the confrontation, right? I don't necessarily judge them, it's fine. But on face value, we would have thought that they weren't one of us, but they were just silent and they didn't have the guts. Next time, they will not be silent, okay? My brother is just like me in, well, almost every way except that he wore a mask, right? So on the street, you would have thought that he was one of them, but he wasn't. He was one of us. You know, so the point is I can say I believe with total honesty and truth that we are a lot bigger than we think, and we're a lot more varied and diverse than we think as well. But anyway, that's good that I was have to talk about my story. Waste time. I have two main points really. The first point is that it's about these groups right now. So honestly, at the moment, this is just my humble opinion that let's say you had one person who was, say, on the fence, right, and you want to wake them up. At this moment in time, you're probably going to have to spend 100% of your energy to get that person over the fence, because there's nothing like, except for maybe cost of living and maybe ULEX and whatever it's called. You know, these types of topics are getting people there as well. But because there isn't that imminent threat of tyranny, it's a lot harder to wake people up, you know? So you could spend 100% of your energy trying to wake that person up, and that's great. Or you can wait for the next crisis and spend about 10% of your energy to wake that same person up. So my sort of message is that I think now is the time to almost choose our battles smarter. We used to run around and try to do everything, and I think that the politicians and the globalists were kind of laughing at us because they knew that like none of it would work, but a lot of it worked to get us together, so that's fine. But like obviously the normal ways of pushing back didn't work to change policy, right? They brought us together, but the, you know, petitions, and they're still good to have on record. As long as our expectations are low, as long as we don't expect one petition to change the entire government, because it's not going to. Because what we've learned is that, like in Australia, for example, we had 600,000 people on the streets for one bill. Now in Victoria, we only have 6 million people in the entire state, and it's a big state. It's probably the size of England. Now that 6 million population includes children and retired people and disabled people, right? So to have 10% of the entire population on the streets means that's probably at least 50% of the entire population, right? People who couldn't go, people who didn't have a car, whatever, couldn't afford to go. That bill still went through, right? Now, they used to say, oh, if 3% of the population are against something in a democracy, then they can change everything. I don't think that's necessarily the case right now. And by the way, I'm not being depressing. All I'm saying is that we need to focus on the things that we can get something out of energy-wise. And I believe that keeping these groups running is actually the most important thing. Why? Because I said at the beginning, it's kind of like having a taser and not having to use it, right? You want to have it with you, but if you don't have to use it, that's great. Having groups like this, you want to have a group and you hope that you never need to count on them for like survival. But if you do need to count on them for survival, you're going to be really glad that you kept them going. And so, for example, and talking about energy, like, you know, obviously the LGBT drag queen story times, you guys know all about these topics. So in Melbourne, we worked really hard to stop this one drag queen story time in a public library, because obviously it definitely shouldn't be in a public library, and if adults want to go to it, that's their own choice. But anyway, the point is, we were able to stop that event, and we patted ourselves on the back. We were really happy about it, right? And the next week there was 10 more. Right? So they're like, oh yeah, okay, we'll give you this little one. And so there is an element of, I think that they like to distract us, you know, like, oh, disinformation, misinformation bill over here, oh, the voice referendum for Australia, if you've heard about it, oh, LGBT here, and we are just like, you know, going around like crazy, and they're kind of laughing at us because we're just running around like headless chickens. And the point is that I know this is hard, this is going to be hard to understand and to accept, but there's a saying, it's don't interfere with your enemy when they're in the process of destroying themselves. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes people like us with so much passion, we might actually be prolonging the inevitable by pushing back against every little thing. Like, we might have to watch the show unfold a little bit and wait for our opportunity to wake people up when it's easier. I think if a parent is going to bring their child, their 2-year-old, to a drag queen story time, unfortunately, I don't think that we can save that child. And I think that we need to accept that we can't help everybody. And part of the process is, unfortunately, people are going to get hurt along the way. But if we run around trying to save everyone, we are going to get hurt, and we're not going to save anybody. So, for example, in Australia, there is this disinformation, misinformation bill. I don't know if you've heard about it, but basically,
Same as that online
I can't
bill.
say anything